Welcome everybody back to another expert review of 2021. Today we're joined by the phenomenal Rupert Chapman of Unity Property. And Rupert, it's been a dynamic 90 days since we last did our last forecast. And we were looking at things like liquidity, needing the cash to be accessible to seize opportunities. We looked at Brexit. We looked at what might come up when the stamp duty cliff hits us. Now, recapping all of that, we made some forecasts, but I'm not going to poke you in the ribs and say, you got it right or you got it wrong, Rupert. What I'd like to do is review where you think, with events that have happened in the first quarter, your view might have changed.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. And I knew you were going to bring up the previous interview at some point during the course of this interview. But to hit me straight away from the outset with it, then, let's get that behind us, and then we can talk about other things afterwards. And thank you for calling me an expert, actually, as of today, and something that has changed since the last time. I'm actually an expat now, and so I'm coming to you live from southern Portugal, where actually it's probably not that much warmer today than it is in the UK, but generally speaking, we're enjoying the warmer climate, so that's great.
What you're telling me is this isn't a Zoom background, Rupert. This is actually
this is real. Yeah, this is a real background. Yeah, and you can see the shaft of bullshit coming in across my screen from the sun at the moment. So there you are. Yes, it has been, and I think we were all predicting something that we probably won't be predicting as of today. Back there 3 months ago. In fact, I think you put out a series of different videos on why it's absolutely certain that the housing market was going to crash, and I think that we're all revisiting that at the moment with, well, okay, maybe we were right, but maybe we need to adjust the timescales a little bit, and throw in a few caveats as well. So what has changed? The government have reacted, people have reacted, and we have got ourselves ahead of the competition, if you like, which has produced quite a positive vibe, a positive feeling amongst investors, amongst people, amongst the public, the consumers generally in the UK at the moment. So we're in a different situation that we were 3 months ago. I think a key fact, which is headlined in the Times this morning, but was something we spoke about, or David and I spoke about back in September, is that the savings ratios of consumers are just literally going through the roof. And we're now sitting on this huge pot of cash. We're all being vaccinated by crazy. We're just waiting for the floodgates to open so we can go through to our summer holidays and everything else. And I can just see an absolute buying frenzy. People have got money in the bank, and they are likely, the normal situation when you've got money in the bank that you don't normally have is that you actually then go out and spend it. So I think we're in a very different situation to the situation that we were in 3 months ago.
There's this old famous saying, isn't there, that money needs a home, and if its home is getting 0.1% or less per annum, then that's not going to sit well. But another point I'd like to pick up on very quickly is that this, harking back to about this time last year, certainly to April of 2020, the markets were predicting normality, weren't they, by summer 2020, which wasn't something that happened. The UK's vaccination program has been driven by politicians rather than scientists, hence we're not quite doing it in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. We've decided to elongate the time between shots with no evidence that that is clinically effective, but because it ticks some boxes in the headlines and all that kind of thing. So do you think that looking at the current situation and putting it in the context of property investment, do we have enough information for that sort of unbridled optimism here?
Well, I think what the policy of the government is definitely kicking the can down the road, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean that it is effectively kicking the can down the road, and we don't know where the can's going to stop, and when the change in fortunes, if you like, is going to happen. So, and I do have a viewpoint that by kicking the can down the road, they could actually avert that change in fortunes altogether. And what that requires is a sort of a spiral effect, you know, the cause and effect of optimism, where the effect of the cause keeps spiraling to a point where reality takes over from an artificially created situation. So it's probably a good policy from the government to do this, and it could actually be effective. I'm not saying it's likely to be effective. I'm saying that there is, you know, an equal possibility that it could be effective.
I'm sure you've read Galbraith's book, The Great Crash of '29. Not that we're in a comparable situation to that now, but one of the points that he makes is that any kind of crisis is like, I don't know, dropping a big stone into a pond and the ripples planning out, and the idea of government being to sort of talk it down and calm things over. So in that sense, you know, you can see where they're coming from.
There's a lot of people out there who, you know, baffle us really and make us feel that they are experts in things we will never know enough about, using acronyms and data and numbers and things that, you know, we don't study on a day-to-day basis. And we just, you know, look at them with mouths open and, you know, take in what they have to say. But they're talking about data, they're talking about money, they're talking about, you know, numbers and making predictions from these things. I actually view economic activity more about human behavior. And the best way, I've said this to you before many times, David, the best way I think you can consider this is to actually take the money out of the equation altogether, and just forget it exists, because actually money and all of these are just measures of what humans are doing. But as measures, they are also causational. So the cause and effect can spiral and amplify from that point of view. So what we're saying here, David, is what are you going to do when you wake up in the morning before you go to bed at night, whether or not you're a consumer, whether or not you're a company director, whether or not you're an AIM listed, you know, chairman of the board, you know, what are you going to be doing? What is your behavior when you wake in the morning to when you go to bed at night? And the difference between a boom and a recession is literally those choices that humans make. So where we are at the moment is a situation where humans can look at their bank balances and say, oh, that's strange. It's not in the red as it normally is when times are good. Again, cause effect situation. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a barbecue or a caravan or a house or whatever, or I'm going to refurbish my house and do an extension and things like that. So it's that behavior that actually then prompts the consumer spending and the consumer-driven situation. I believe that by getting ahead of the game, because I mentioned it, because I think it is important, because we are in a relative situation with other countries and other parts of Europe particularly, is that by getting ahead of the game with this optimism, what we can do is get to a situation where the markets respond to that and sterling can strengthen. And as you know, and I know by looking at it almost hourly at the moment, we've gone from a January the 1st 112 to the euro to this morning 118. And it looks set to continue along that path. Now, when it starts to do that, then people who are looking for work will go to the stronger countries, the stronger currencies in order to work. Now, Europe is a very strange situation that there's very few countries in Europe that actually has a different currency to the euro. So there ain't much of a shortlist for people to choose from. So I can see a lot of demand from people wanting to come into the UK in order to work, even though Brexit is a sort of a, you know, has been touted as a way of preventing that from happening. But the truth is, it's not preventing it from happening. It's just giving our government a little bit more control on how it happens. So I think that by getting ahead of the game, you can actually encourage people to come into the UK, which then produces the GDP, which is the reality that overtakes the artificial situation that's created in the first place. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic. I think we're in for a pretty good summer. I think the can has definitely been kicked down the road. And I think, you know, maybe in September time, we need to be looking forward, you know, perhaps with more realism as to what could happen with that can. But for now, I think it's looking pretty damn good.
You've raised a number of really great points, and you keep using the phrase "kick the can down the road." Have you been watching the previous interviews by some of our other guests who have all used the term "kick the can down the road"? It's almost like you've been spying on other people's reviews here.
Well, I'm going to be absolutely honest with you, Andrew. I haven't watched any of them so far, and I deliberately didn't watch them because I knew that this interview was coming up, and I didn't want to, you know, be accused of plagiarism or be unduly influenced by some of the errors of my peers. So,
no, not at all, not at all. Well, you've made some really great points there, and you're broadcasting to us live from Portugal here, having become an expat, and you're sort of sitting on the other side of the Brexit fence, actually seeing from the inside what people are talking about in the UK. Now, you've talked about the mindset of people, the fact that take the money out of the equation and how people are thinking is key. And people have got this feel-good factor. There's pent-up demand from being locked up, but the government, through their actions, through the furlough, through the budget, which is all about getting out there and spending, getting out there and creating a bit of inflation, getting out there and creating activity with super deductions for businesses, is all about making people feel good. And when you look at things like the vaccination program, that's another tick in the box of feeling good. Do you think that is going to make Britain outperform other parts of the world, not just Europe, but other parts of the world, because of our feel-good factor, the fact that we are running third in the global league table of vaccinations, the fact that we have given away 130% super deductions? Or do you think we're potentially headed into a crash, blindly spending every last pound that we've got?
Well, I don't think we're heading into a crash. I think we are heading into a period of quite strong spending. And I think that following that period, I don't see a particular precipice that we're going to fall off. I do see that there is, you know, storm clouds on the horizon where things can turn in the other direction. And that's something, as I said, we'll perhaps be looking at maybe August to September time. But no, I don't see that precipice. And the last time we spoke, 3 months ago, we had a date for a precipice, basically, which was the end of the stamp duty holiday. I described it as borrowing next summer's housing market and sticking it into autumn, you know, which basically meant that, you know, come next summer, there won't be a housing market. So this extension of the deadline, and not just that in isolation, but the extension of the deadline plus all the other factors and stimulus that has been introduced into the economy suggests to me that, yes, we don't really need to consider that for another 3 or 4 months or so. Coming on to how it looks over here, I think that the other point, the point about relativity, is that it is the other side of the mirror on this side of the channel. There is not much to celebrate. We're all in Germany and France locking down, suffering from the English variant, as it's called over here. That basically, you know, we're basically, some of the major European countries are still in survival mode, hugely frustrated with their governments over and the EU particularly, over the vaccination program, and hugely envious of the UK's position. Now, if we look outside of Europe, I think that that's interesting what Biden is doing, because it seems that he's doing a similar thing to Johnson for America. And that is likely to be very effective for America. So I don't see us gaining supremacy economically over the States in this situation. I think that they will probably come out stronger than the UK and Europe. But I just think that timing difference just could give UK that, you know, head start that then spirals into a greater lead for the UK and a greater position for the UK over the months to come. It seems to me it's easier to keep the pack behind you when you're ahead than actually catch up with the pack when you're behind.
A number of places in Europe, your neck of the woods included, heavily reliant on a summer tourist trade. Now, this is another thing where this sort of vaccination lag might be likely to hit home, insofar as even if everybody in the UK is vaccinated by the end of July, which I think is the plan, and I think we're on track for that, will people nonetheless want to take their holidays in countries which are kind of spiking, or might they then stay at home or look elsewhere from their traditional destinations?
I mean, we don't know what's going to happen from June, July, and the likelihood is that you know, it's too early to call that, because at the moment, for example, Portugal have been locked down since Christmas, and Portugal has got a very, very rosy picture right now. It's locked down tighter over this Easter week deliberately in anticipation of getting the numbers as low as possible before the season starts. But remember, this is the second season, and it's not just about the tourist trade. Countries such as this are massively reliant on the wealthier countries and the input from the wealthier countries and their individuals. So this is a huge retirement area, and not just from the UK, but from all over Europe. Property prices down here are very much influenced by the activities of people coming over to retire. And whilst this sort of upset of COVID has actually probably increased people's wishes to come and live on the southern climes and things like that. So there's a pent-up demand for sure. But as it stands, there's not the people with the feet on the ground to actually make the purchase decisions. So we've got a lot of stock on the market, quite high price stock, but a huge amount to choose from. So it's an interesting situation. I think it's pent up, and I think that we'll see a lot of inward investment to the coasts of Portugal once people are actually allowed to travel. It's just unknown how long it will take the Germans and the French to overcome their current problems with this virus. And obviously the vaccination program seems to be the thing that really hammers it down. So we might have to either write off this summer, or at least say, look, this summer's really not going to make a start until August, and probably will then stay pretty strong until the end of October or something like that.
Well, that's really interesting that it's almost like the globe is running at different paces. You mentioned America aligning to the UK. Well, the UK, I don't think would ever seek to think that it could be a dominant economic force against America. It's more affected by the trade winds off our shores, where America could be either a hurricane passing by, or we could get the warm Florida suns shining on us. And I think how you're positioning that is Europe could be seen potentially as a bit of a hurricane force to our south, but to our west, we have the warmth blowing in from the US. Now, that's an interesting sort of analogy that you drew there.
Yeah, and we're in a unique position, always have been, being the dominant currency. The country with a different currency to the euro that's dominant in Europe. So the other European countries who have a different currency tend to be net receivers, as opposed to, you know, those that are actually leading the pack in terms of GDP and wealth. So, so the UK has always been in that unique position, but they've become even more unique now by cutting their ties with the legislature of Europe. So the question is that going to be good or bad for the UK going forward? Well, when you look at America, which is, the UK could happily survive off the drops off the table of the America. I think that we are a very, very good staging post for America and for other wealthy, maybe Far East countries as well, being right next to the UK and being a leading GDP country, because of that timing difference of the fact that, we're a different currency, we're not set by the EU rules. So you can either go directly to the EU or you can go to Europe and have a bridge into the EU from that point of view. So I think that we're always going to be in quite a unique position. Personally, I think in the long term, that will only work to the UK's favour. I don't think it's going to go against us.
One of the things that came to the fore early on in the pandemic situation was some supply chain issues. I mean, not just loo paper, but all sorts of things ground to halt in a sense. For a few decades now, we've been, and then we had the Suez Canal block just a week or two back. Global supply chain issues have come very much to the fore. And do you think, I mean, and some pandemics can sometimes lead to kind of real big kind of changes in the pendulum in terms of the way we do things. Do you think that there might be sort of medium to long-term impact in, for example, the just-in-time philosophy, the global supply chain thing? Do you think that there might be a tendency to do things perhaps a bit more locally if it makes, it might not make quite such good economic sense, but it keeps the shelves stacked?
Well, for somebody who received a Christmas card 2 weeks ago, I should be along with you on that one, David, but no, I don't. I actually think the media have had to really scrape the barrel post-Brexit to find stories of supply problems. That clearly there have been, and it was always forecasted that there will be teething problems as a result. But I think they've had to scrape the barrel, in all honesty. We haven't seen really significant problems as a result of a literally cut in the sand from this day to the next change. So are we really going to see such problems, on a transitional basis, going forward? And I would say no. And again, this comes down to human behavior. At the end of the day, if you can physically do it, and you can physically do just in time, then no amount of political legislation, okay, is ultimately going to be able to prevent that from happening in the long term, or the medium term even, because the people who are actually causing these situations are entrepreneurs. So if there's a situation where it makes sense for a company to set their factory up in the UK because some legislator is saying that you can't send your stuff across from France, then they're just going to, come over here and do a deal on rates and buy a piece of land and build a factory in the UK. So I don't see this being a problem at all in the future. I actually see, if anything, it can go to the favour of the UK.
Yes, I mean, I was thinking again of it being perhaps more of an opportunity than a problem. And manufacturing, you see, is changing. The technology is changing. Amazon drop things probably will be soon having pilotless vehicles and drones and this kind of thing. And we'll be using technologies like 3D printing to make something that would otherwise have to be shipped from China, that kind of thing. So I was more thinking of that kind of thing, and the way that, for example, the pandemic caused us to change our behavior in terms of meetings, so that we would normally be sort of sitting around a table having this meeting, which would be sort of impractical in terms of your location, but it would have been more the rule rather than the exception. And I was just thinking that, with changes in the tech, it might make better economic sense to become more local, not just in the context of the UK and Brexit, but in the big sort of global picture of things.
Yeah, sure. And, underlying everything is change. And that change has been continuous and will be continuous. And I think that this undercurrent of technology is going to create these changes. I think the pandemic has accelerated change in some areas. But again, we come back to this cause and effect. You say it would be difficult for us to get around the table with me being in Portugal. Well, actually, it's the other way around. I wouldn't be in Portugal if it hadn't been the technological change that would have actually facilitated that I can run UK businesses and, you know, live my working life in a very, very similar fashion over here than I did when I was back in the UK.
So looking forward, Rupert, I mean, you've relocated to Europe for whatever the reasons be, and you've invested in real estate over there, so you're living the dream, so to speak. Now, the economic future of marketplaces and what we're looking at here is specifically property. You've touched on the fact that if Europe makes it difficult for entrepreneurs to move goods across borders, then they will move stuff. Now, we've had situations with Europe threatening to renege on contracts they've formed with COVID vaccine suppliers, which has caused entrepreneurs to actually look at things in a different light. Do you think the free ports and entrepreneurs who are watching with interest the European situation is going to create more opportunities for the UK and more real estate investment? We're both into commercial property, so do you think that is actually going to drive a demand in the UK that won't be felt elsewhere, or gives us a head start on other areas?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to comment on the relativity of this because I really don't know a great deal about the property market outside of the UK. So to actually make the comparison, I don't really feel I'm able to. So I can focus, you know, on what I think the property market in the UK will be. And I think that for whenever there is optimism, whenever people have got money in their pockets, then the property market in the UK is going to be very buoyant and prices are likely to rise. I think in the UK, we've also historically experienced this north-south divide and this undercurrent that has of technological change that has been amplified by COVID. And this is the point. I think COVID has accelerated what was happening in any case. That we are going to see this ripple effect taking place. So there's a huge gradient at the moment in property prices, as you know, between the north and the south, and not just between the north and the south. I mean, you've got these little hot spots, you know, these cold spots, if you might like, where I'm trying to think of an example that might be accurate because I haven't looked recently, but something, for example, you know, Kettering versus Corby or something like that. You know, you're going to get quite a significant price gradient there. And in the longer term, those gradients just fill in. So there are definitely areas where you can see that those gradients are just going to rebalance and there are good opportunities. So I do see that there will be investment in these areas. With regard to sort of new investment, land, new factories, repurposing and everything else, I think UK is going to be a very attractive place for people from all over the world or businesses from all over the world to set up a satellite station, personally. I think it would be a good hedge against an unknown future.
And coming back to the residential property market for a moment, and the way that that's interacted with the tech and the way that that's interacted with the pandemic, suddenly it's become less attractive to be in a city centre and more attractive to have a big garden, simply because we can, to a greater degree than ever, work from anywhere. And as you said earlier, the tech for that was always in place, but the will to do that wasn't there. And there's a sense in which, you know, pandemic forced people at boardroom level to make decisions that nobody would have had the guts to stand up and say 12, 13, 14 months ago.
Yeah, I personally think that's a temporary thing, David. I think that's going to reverse because I think that the underlying trend is actually going in the other direction. So I think that if you're going to be locked up in your flat and enforced that you can't go out the door of your flat for 6 months at a time, then that is definitely going to have an influence on your behavior and your decision making as to where you want to live. So if we can make an assumption that being locked up in your flat for 6 months at a time is not going to be part of the next 5 years or next 10 years of future, I actually think that the underlying technology is going in the other direction. So what we're going to see is less congestion in town centres. We are going to see potentially less retail businesses in town centres, which facilitate the repurposing and makes it economically viable for people to repurpose and build accommodation and residential accommodation in town centres. And we're social animals. I mean, the people who are 12, 13, 14 at the moment, you know, are going to be the people who are going to be looking to buy their first house or rent their first house, and they want to be where the action is when they're 19, 20, 21. And not just that, you know, people at later decades actually quite enjoy being where the action is as well. So I can see a resurgence of town centre lifestyles, town centre livings, electric cars, electric Ubers, you know, lack of congestion as we have known it in the past, cleaner air. I think all of these will actually go back to our natural desire to be social animals. And I will see that these city centres will have a resurgence in the next decade, personally.
Perhaps a demographic shift and them to become sort of overall younger. I mean, I was, my background, I was a village boy until about the age of 20, and then a city boy ever since. But now the pandemic forced me to sort of pause, step back, and, you know, of the three of us here, Andrew's the only one who's still living in the same place that he was a year ago, and we've, for whatever reason, distanced ourselves slightly from the thick of it, and whether we will return or not, it remains to be seen in our personal circumstances.
Well, Andrew's had a, you know, career in banking, so you have to forgive him to be a little bit, you know, and actually celebrate the fact that he is actually quite entrepreneurial. So he's shaken off some of that. But yes, I do feel that this town centre thing, though, I mean, cities have always been, you know, young centric, if you like. And they've always attracted the young, and it's very, very exciting to live in these situations. And so I think one of the bigger changes that we're going to experience in the next 10 years is we're going to see a very, very different but very, very vibrant town and city centre situation, where people will still work from home. They won't necessarily, the offices don't have to be in the city centres. So the offices are going to be where the economics of having an office will take you, which perhaps might be on more of the arterial routes, the motorway routes and things of that nature. But yes, I do see that there will be, you know, a continuation of the working from home. We might lose some staff who are basically spending all of their time filling up water bottles and things like that in the office. But on the other hand, that was all the unproductive stuff. So hopefully these people will then repurpose themselves to more productive activity. And that all translates into the numbers that are put up when they do the GDP results. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic personally.
So to help our audience and to sort of summarize where we're at here, what we're looking at, Rupert, is an optimistic outlook with some repurposing of commercial, some transitioning to better quality spaces for residential for those who have got a little fed up of perhaps living in the one-bed flats in the city centre, and positivity of mindset that's been created is creating opportunities. You seem to be alluding to an economic future of prosperity. With that in mind, where do you think your adjustment to your compass and your forecast will be for the remainder of this year, and the big opportunities that you would be suggesting to people? In your shoes, I would take attention or pay attention to this particular thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying there's not going to be a recession. I'm saying the can has been kicked down the road, and I'm saying that they may have averted a recession. particularly if the reality will catch up. But I'm not saying there's not going to be a recession, but let's, be realistic about what recessions actually do. They produce a lot of hardship for sections of society. They don't necessarily produce hardship for other sections of society. And basically, you've got this sort of a situation where if you keep your job, everything's cheaper and life's pretty good, although it's all doom and gloom in the newspapers every day. If you lose your job, well, I'm sorry, it's going to be pretty tough, and you're going to ride it out. But recessions mean change, and change means opportunity. And what we'll find is that, over the and recessions always end. Historically, I think we can rely on that situation. So if we just look beyond whether we're going to have a recession or not, I am very optimistic. And what I think people can do is the best advice I could give anybody is to embrace change, because every time there's some news which might, on the face of it, be negative news, you've got to actually look for the positive that sits behind that piece of negative news and embrace the change. But at the same time, hark back onto the original principles. Don't ever diverge from, the base principles of what your business is about. So if your business is about buying property, it's about making money when you buy, it's about cash flowing positive if you hold, and it's having more than one exit. I mean, it's a bloody simple game, really, isn't it, Andrew?
It is when you look at it and distill it down to that. Without being rude to our audience or to you, there are several hundred pieces of legislation you need to comply with in order to do exactly what you're prescribing there. So I'm not going to say it's easy, but the theory and the strategic level is what we need to focus on. So any sort of parting words of wisdom for our audience? What you've obviously become an expat. Is your sort of advice, hey everybody, let's all become expats? Or is your advice, keep on doing the same, or something else?
Well, sorry, I think what we've done, and my wife has got a trading business in the UK with a premises and with staff, and we've proven so far that we can manage our UK businesses from overseas, and that is testament to changing human behaviours, changing business behaviours, and particularly the technological changes that have taken place. So what I would say to people is, actually, yes, this is an option now, which it wasn't an option before. Obviously, if people have children who are school age, it's a major obstacle to doing that. It doesn't mean you can't do it. There's some very good private international schools here. English-speaking schools as well, but clearly children have set their friendship groups up and everything else, and that's a huge, change. If you have so many, look to when they become university age, that would be the time to make the change. But certainly, it's an option that was only available to those who are literally just retiring and stopping their working lives and their careers. Whereas now it's an option for people to actually mix the latter part of their working life with a good lifestyle. So I would definitely recommend people consider it, at least as far as that's concerned. Something you alluded to earlier, I actually, before we actually arrived here, I hadn't fully researched the tax implications of living over here. We're not tax exiles in that regard, but there are some particularly favourable tax situations, particularly for those who have rental income or who are directors of limited company that take dividends, or who indeed want to live off pension income over here. So if you fall into that category, then you're going to have a nice little icing on the cake bonus that you'll find when you do get here as well.
looking at your backdrop with the sunny outlook, the beautiful garden, and
I don't know if you can see the swimming pool behind, but
oh yes, very nice. A pool in the back garden, and there might be some preferential tax status to be had as well by living there. You're living the dream, Rupert. You're living the dream, but you don't look old enough to be retired, may I politely say to you as well.
No, I work as hard, as many hours here as I did in the UK, if I'm honest. I just spend a little bit less time on Facebook and a little less time, being drawn in by all of that media circus. A little bit more time out cycling, out walking on the cliffs and on the beach, and just getting a better balance, I would say. So that's the main thing. But yeah, I mean, my business is done in the UK. My thought, I still sort of think UK centric, but perhaps with a little bit more perspective than before.
Excellent. David, have you any sort of last things you want to ask Rupert or chip in at this point?
Just to say that we started today with change, we finished today with change, so we've gone sort of full circle in a way. And for anybody who missed the first 2 minutes, there was this feeling that as we approach our I know post-pandemic, post-Brexit hangover thing, that we're no longer focusing on liquidity now, but we're looking at the spectrum of inflation. So kind of perhaps perspective has changed a little bit, and let's see where we are in 3 months' time.
Oh, thank you very much. They're really important points, and I think it goes back to what we were looking at last year. Cash is king. Now we're saying we need to hedge against inflation. So, Rupert, it's been an absolute pleasure once again to have you join us. And if you're not already a member of the Unity Property Group, I suggest you hop along and take a good look at Rupert's Unity Property Group. Phenomenal resource, both for members and for people with a lot more knowledge. Rupert doesn't sell anything directly at you. So again, it's a nice, safe community to join. Rupert, thank you. David, thank you very much again for your excellent chairing of this interview. And it's goodbye from me. I'm Andrew Roberts.
Goodbye from me. I'm David Clouter.
And thanks very much, and goodbye.